You know, we all have these stories we tell ourselves, about ourselves. But what happens when those stories, the ones that define us, aren't entirely true? Well, today, we're going to unpack a really powerful way to look at your personal narrative in a completely new light.
I'm sure you know what I mean. Those quiet thoughts that just feel like facts. I'm just not a leader. Or maybe, I always choke when things get tough. These narratives can feel so real, so solid that they literally start running our lives. But what if they aren't as set in stone as they feel?
So here's our game plan. We're going to look at the stories that trap us, then introduce this new lens called deconstruction. We'll walk through the process, weigh its power against its risks, and see how it all points toward rewriting your own script. Let's dive in.
We're all living by these invisible scripts, whether we realize it or not. In narrative therapy, they call them problem-saturated stories. And that's such a great name for them, right? These are the stories so jam-packed with problems that they just crowd everything else out. No room for our strengths, our wins, or any other way of seeing ourselves. We just end up accepting them as the truth.
So, the big question is, how on earth do you challenge a script that feels so real? Well, that brings us to our main event, a technique that helps us see our stories from the outside in. It's a tool for analyzing these invisible forces. The official term for it is deconstruction. And the key word here, the most important one, is exploration. This is not about destroying your story or your past. It's about becoming a kind of detective in your own life, asking, wait a minute, where did this so-called truth about myself actually come from? And this quote, this gets right to the heart of it. That feeling of I'm not good enough, it probably didn't just pop into your head out of nowhere. Deconstruction suggests it was likely borrowed from what society expects, from what our culture values, maybe even from our family's history. And that shift in perspective is, well, it's profound.
Okay, so that's the big idea. But how does it actually work in practice? Let's get into the nitty-gritty. Imagine your story is this tightly woven piece of fabric. Deconstruction is just the process of gently pulling on the individual threads to see what it's really made of.
Now, I have to say this again because it is absolutely crucial. The goal is not to tear your experiences apart or tell you your feelings aren't real. Not at all. The goal is to loosen the story's grip on you, to challenge its authority, so it's no longer the only story that gets to define who you are. Just think of it like a collaborative investigation. It's not a straight line, but a series of investigative questions. A therapist doing this work partners with you, getting curious and tracing the history of that problem story. It's all about discovery, not judgment. This whole investigation really boils down to 3 key moves. First, you unpack what are called dominant discourses. Sounds fancy, but we'll explain. Second, you identify what's absent but implicit. And third, you start to question the gaps and contradictions in the story. Let's break each one down. First up, these dominant discourses. Basically, they're the big unspoken rules of our culture. So take this example. Someone feels like a total failure for being unemployed. Deconstruction helps them ask, okay, where did I get the rule that my job equals my worth as a person? Because that's not a law of nature, right? It's a cultural story, one that's fed by certain ideas about productivity. Once you see it as an external idea, that feeling of personal failure starts to lose its sting.
Okay, next up is my favorite one, finding the absent but implicit. This is so cool. Whenever you complain about something you lack, say courage, it actually reveals that you deeply value that very thing. Think about it. Your frustration isn't proof of weakness. It's proof of your commitment to being brave. The problem story was hiding your own values from you in plain sight. So what's the payoff? When you start pulling on these threads and seeing your story in a whole new way, what actually happens? What are the real benefits? Well, the effects can be incredibly freeing, especially for people who've been pushed to the margins by society. It provides this huge relief by shifting the blame away from them and onto the oppressive ideas they've been forced to internalize. It builds a kind of critical awareness so you can see how the world is shaping how you see yourself. And really, it creates intellectual freedom. You stop asking, what's wrong with me? And you start asking the much, much more powerful question, why do I believe this is true?
But of course, like any powerful tool, this one has to be handled with a lot of care. It's really important to be honest about the potential complexities and the risks involved.
Yeah, this is definitely not a simple one-size-fits-all fix. The same process that can offer so much relief also has its own set of challenges. It's a nuanced and complex approach that you really have to navigate carefully. For one thing, it can feel really abstract and philosophical, which is not what everyone needs, especially if they're in a crisis. There's also a big risk that if it's not done with real skill and empathy, it can feel like your very real pain is being brushed aside. And finally, if you take apart all your old truths, what do you hold on to? It can create this temporary feeling of being adrift, which is exactly why it requires a skilled guide to help navigate through that uncertainty.
So after all that, where does this leave us? What's the ultimate goal of taking our stories apart like this? Let's bring it all together for the final takeaway.
I just love this quote. It calls deconstruction the intellectual engine of therapy. And that's perfect. It's the force, the critical energy that you need to break free from the pull of that old problem-saturated story. It creates the space you need to start writing a new one, a preferred one.
So, I'll leave you with this final thought. The moment you understand that your stories are constructed, you gain the power to deconstruct them, and ultimately the power to rewrite them. It all begins with one simple, curious question. So what taken-for-granted truth about yourself would you be willing to question first?